Hey! What's up, everybody? You know the deal. You're on the Glosso America YouTube channel. Hit like, hit subscribe, and let's get after it. Hey, welcome to your favorite Average Good podcast. As always, I'm Jimmy Conrad, but no Charlie Davies. We got Paul Tenorio from The Athletic joining us because we just fresh off the press conference from Mauricio Pochettino. Paul, what were your big takeaways from what the head cheese, the big enchilada, had to say at this press conference?
Yeah, I think the biggest one revolves around the biggest name that's back in the camp, and that's Gio Reyna. And the reality is that Gio is not really playing a lot at his club. But Mauricio Pochettino said, look, this is a special player. This is a player that we have to consider kind of as a special circumstance to bring him in. And I thought it was interesting on multiple levels what he said. He said, we have to bring him in, maybe not even just about how much he's playing or what he does on the field, but to spend time with him, to be around him. It's our last chance to be around these players before the March window. We want to be around him. He was asked whether that's a contradiction against what he has said before, where you have to prove yourself on the field.
It feels like it a little bit. It does.
And I think, the reality is, like, there have been these kind of exceptions for Gio in other instances as well. But we have to acknowledge that this return of Gio Reyna is coming in a camp where there are a lot of players who aren't here. And I think that was the other takeaway for me, is that Mauricio Pochettino continues to try to carve out space and time and care for players who are coming back from injury, who have had changes at the club level with coaches. So for that reason, no Christian Pulisic, who's expected to return from an injury this weekend for Milan, but isn't going to be in the camp. No Weston McKennie, who has a new coach at Juve. And Mauricio Pochettino said he'd like to see him stay there, but continue to build that relationship with the coach, stay on the field for Juventus. No Tim Weah, he's out injured. No Johnny Cardoso, he's only just working back from an injury. No Anthony Robinson, he remains injured. So a lot of players are, no Malik Tillman, also just coming back from injury. So those injuries, I think, opened the door to the possibility of bringing Gio Reyna back in. And let's see how it goes. Sebastian Berhalter also on this roster,
yes,
which is another interesting wrinkle.
Of course. A nice little wrinkle there. I guess when you think about it from a coaching perspective, you have to be very delicate in your messaging, because if you're giving an opportunity to someone who maybe hasn't earned it and gets thrown into the quote unquote special category, that messaging and how it's received by the rest of the group doesn't always play well. I'm just saying it might work out fine. And I'm sure that it will, because Mauricio Pochettino has built in many successful cultures over his time as manager at multiple destinations. But this one feels a little tricky given the baggage, I would say, that comes with Gio Reyna. There's no denying his talent. Everybody knows it. Calling him a special player is not outside the realm of possibility, right? We know that he's capable of that. But what has he shown? And he's only played, I think, 100 and something minutes since September 21st. And yeah, it's interesting. And I'm kind of curious as to how it gets all balanced and how he fits into it. Big camp for him. Not just him, Paul, but for a lot of these players who, and me and Charlie were talking about it a little bit earlier, like, wait, you mean me? You want me back in the roster? We have a couple of those guys in the team. We'll see if they can take advantage of this opportunity as well. Okay, so you said something about the injuries. And I know there's been some beef between Oliver Glasner from Crystal Palace and Mauricio Pochettino that seems to be simmering. Not going away anytime soon, but simmering. How do you think that, or what did Mauricio talk about with regard to managing those types of relationships overall, not just with Chris Richards, but for the group in general?
Yeah, and I think his first thing was defense of himself, to say there's no one that cares about players and their injuries as much as we do. We never take risks with players. We're very careful with how we use them. He alluded to Christian Pulisic in Denver and making sure that the doctors and Christian and the team were all on the same page before Christian played in that game. And I think, actually, to be fair to Mauricio Pochettino, if you go back and look at his call-ups, there have been multiple occasions in which he's left players off the squad because they're working back from injury. They're not 100%. He thought it would be better for them to rest. This camp is another example of that. And he talked, look, yes, there are too many games right now. There's too much demand on players. But there's also an acknowledgement, there has to be an acknowledgement that the club plays a role in that too. It's not just the national team that has to say, okay, we should give him a break during the international window. There's a give and take here as well. I would note that Chris Richards played every game in the lead up to the last window for Palace, went to the national team, played in those games, and came back and played in the very next game for Crystal Palace. So as concerned as they might have been about his calf, they stuck him right back out on the field when he got back from national team duty. I think it goes both ways. I think Mauricio Pochettino was careful with how he phrased it, but his thing is our most important person that we're worried about with each relationship is the player himself. It's not about what does the coach need, what does the club need, what do we need? It's what are we doing to make sure that we're putting this player in the best possibility to be successful. And that extends again to players who are injured, but I think we've seen also in the past and in this camp as well, it is also about the club standing, right? So Weston McKennie is the example in this camp. Juve has a coaching change. McKennie, it took him a long time to get on the field, as it does every season at Juventus. Okay, what can we do to make sure Weston stays on the field and continues playing? Because as Mauricio Pochettino said, we know what he can do with the national team. We know him very well. We think it's in his best interest to stay at the club. And in the long term, in our best interest for Weston McKennie to keep his starting job and to continue playing at Juve. And I think he's been pretty consistent with that messaging throughout his time with the national team.
All right, Paul, let's take off your journalist hat if you can, if that's even remotely possible. Let's say you're a super fan in the chat right now, hanging out here with us on the Glosso America YouTube channel. Are you concerned with this roster, knowing that we only have one more in March, and that's 4 months away, and a lot can happen in those 4 months, that we're seeing some of the names that we're seeing, that we're kind of in this situation? Or you just like, hey, this is just the way it is, and this is just currently where our player pool is at the moment?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, I think it's totally realistic and normal to say, I'm worried, right? There are guys who haven't been together, who haven't played as much together. We haven't seen a ton of the full squad. I think you're hugely concerned and worried about Anthony Robinson. What's his role going to be? When is he going to be healthy? I think it's totally valid to be concerned that we're here in November. There's one more window after it, and we're back to a squad that feels more experimental than the one that'll be in the World Cup.
Yeah.
But this one's kind of forced in a way to be experimental. There are a lot of guys who are hurt right now. That's the reality of the national team. Last cycle, they didn't really go through this as much. They got very lucky in Qatar that everyone was healthy at the same time, except for Chris Richards and Miles Robinson. Those were the only two absences due to injury going into Qatar. That's not guaranteed this time around. On the other side, I would say this. I remember being in Murcia, Spain, and in Cologne, Germany with the national team right in the lead up to the World Cup. There were a lot of guys in that camp, or a few guys in that camp at least, that didn't end up in Qatar. There were guys who weren't in that camp that did go to Qatar and played important roles. Tim Ream comes to mind as someone who hadn't been in the team since September and was back in the team in June and was starting in Qatar and started every game there. So I think we have to acknowledge that the June camp is important. It's, I think, much more important than maybe the lead up in terms of actually creating the team chemistry. You can tell better than anyone, but once you get to that pre-World Cup camp, that's where the bonds of the team that's actually going to compete are formed to kind of another level. I imagine that there's just this kind of shared belief and this shared joy of getting this opportunity to represent your country that creates just whatever was there in World Cup qualifying, and in this case, no qualifying. It immediately supersedes that, and whoever's there becomes a part of that kind of core.
Well, I'll give you a personal story. In March of 2006, before Bruce Arena named the team, that was our last window before that was going to happen. We played Germany in Germany. I'll just say it was 0-0 at half, Paul. I don't know if I want to say the final score. It ended 4-1. It didn't go well. But on that flight home, Brian Ching and I were on the same flight on the way back. And we both thought we played ourselves off of the team. Not that we were poor, but we didn't take advantage of that opportunity to play against a proper World Cup opponent in their home. And so we enjoyed ourselves on the way back thinking that was it, and we both ended up making the team. So you don't really know, but to your point, there's a ton of tension. And the way that you're playing is a little bit different than when you're on the team and you're trying to build something. So yes, I agree with you ultimately that a lot of that chemistry that we want to see during the World Cup will probably really kick into gear once that tension and pressure of who's going to be named and who isn't, and who made it and who didn't, and you're working through that emotional process together. Both maybe sad for some of your friends that don't make it, but then also excited that you did survive, and now you just got to look forward and make the most of it. That's where, a lot of the proper stuff will happen. However, these are moments where you can plant seeds, a foundation of how we want to play. So I'm very curious. Did you hear anything in the press conference about a potential formation change? Do you think we'll go to a back four here? Do you think it's full steam ahead with the back three? I mean, obviously that's what I would like to see. And then the two wing backs obviously can drop into a back five or a fluid four. But what do you think, or what did you hear in this press conference, if anything, about a potential formation change?
Yeah, there wasn't a ton about formation and tactics. I assume we'll get into that a little bit more ahead of the first game in Philadelphia next week. But I think when I look at the roster, Jimmy, I feel like this leans a little bit more towards a back four than it does a back three, just in the number of midfielders that are here. The one saving grace is, when it comes to that, is there's no wingers on this team. So you can't really play a true 4-3-3. But there are a lot of central midfielders that would play. Like, if you're only playing two behind a dual number 10, there's a lot of guys you brought on this roster, right? So it's like, I think he's left open the door to play both formations, that, you know, that he wants to be able to try both out, where you could see, I think we could see a midfield theoretically here of Tyler Adams, Christian Roldan, and Tanner Tessman. And then you could also see a midfield of Tyler Adams, Tanner Tessman behind Gio Reyna, or behind Brendan Aronson, or something to that effect, Diego Luna. So I just think it's odd to have that many midfielders if you're only going to run two out.
This feels somewhat like a Gold Cup roster, right? Because we didn't have really any wingers for that one either, but we were playing for it with a back four, and that didn't really feel as fluid as I think all of us wanted it to look like. But if you can free up and play a back three, and then free up a Serginho Dest to actually get forward and provide that width for us in a really meaningful way, right? Almost even with Balogun, whoever's going to start for us up top. And then Arston, clearly better when he's got that freedom to get forward. Freeman's the same. Maybe Scally would be the only one. You probably see him as more of a center back. Tolkien can get up and down as well. If with no wingers, it feels like we will play a back three, because our wing backs are better suited to get up and down a little bit better. And
now that there is one hint tactically that I think he made towards the end, when somebody asked about why Diego Luna was listed as a forward and not as a midfielder, and he went into this kind of thing about attacking players and always going for goals. He said he could play as a forward. He could play as underneath the number 9. I wouldn't be surprised to see maybe a 3-5-2, where you use the three midfielders like I talked about, where you have an Adams, Tessman, Roldan trio, and you sacrifice one of those attacking players in favor of two forwards. And whether it's you could have Gio Reyna or Diego Luna underneath the striker, or you could go with Pepe and Balogun, or Haji Wright and Balogun, and that gives you the width comes from the wing backs. It comes from Max Arsene and Dest, or Dest and Freeman, or whoever you want to use there. Yeah. But you still have the need for the three midfielders, which would explain why there's 6 of them on this roster. I think that, and I agree with you also about Scally. In my mind, Scally fits this team much more as a right-sided center back in a back three than he does as a fullback in a back three, or really even in a back four. I just don't think he outranks the other options there. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to go 3-5-2 with two forwards, as the commenters were probably ahead of me on that.
I'm picking up what you're putting down, because Charlie and I talked a little bit earlier about, is it time to see a 3-5-2? Because at some point we might need to utilize it in the World Cup. It could be opponent based, it could be situation based, right? All of a sudden we're down a goal, 20 minutes left. We got to throw as many attacking players out there as possible. So these are obviously good opportunities to try to make that happen. I wouldn't be mad to see a Pepe Balogun, or a Haji Wright Balogun, or Haji Pepe, if he wants to give Balogun a little bit of rest, or just to mix it up, just to see what that looks like. We have to know, like, we've been pushing against, or we've been asking for the back three for a long time. And there's been, it took a long time. And then finally we play the back three, and it unlocks everything. So maybe, with two strikers, we get to see a little bit something different, especially because of the lack of personnel here. If Christian was in the team, obviously it'd be a little bit harder. But since he's not here, and because we might need to see the situation, hey, I'm all in on just seeing what the 3-5-2 looks like in against one of these opponents. It could just be for a half or whatever, but I don't want to see it with like 10 minutes left to go. I actually want to see like proper buildup and thought and passing patterns and ideas that have clearly been established in training that we're trying to execute at a high level. And then once we do it and it doesn't work or whatever, you can tinker accordingly. But I don't want to see it like last 10 minutes of a game. I want to see it kind of early on so that we can make adjustments accordingly. That makes sense.
Yeah, and I'd love to see it against a team like Uruguay, like a really challenging opponent that you're saying, okay, like, we're going to do this because we think it gives us the best options to actually have a chance to win the game, right? Because eventually in a World Cup, you're going to face an opponent that is better than you. And I think a lot of times, and understandably so, the mentality is, okay, we're going to sit back, we're going to absorb, we're going to counter, we're going to look to kind of hit them on the break and see if we can escape this. okay, well, what are our options, our best options to do that, right? Like playing a back three or back five gives you that defensive stability. You could play two defensive-minded midfielders in front of that back line, and you could be, okay, but what does it look like with Hadji as a release point and Balogun? Or what does it look like with our two best goal scorers if Pepe gets back into the form that he's been in with PSV for a long time? So I think there's a lot of value to trying it out. I had heard whispers that there was some thought to that in the last camp, so I wouldn't be surprised. I think, again, when I look at the roster, when I think about the way Pochettino answered that question, I'm feeling 3-5-2. I'm feeling two strikers.
All right, this will be interesting. I'm excited to see what the lineups look like ahead of these two games in particular. Any mention of Matt Turner? Do you think that's a bit of a surprise omission, given that I know he hasn't played a competitive game since the Revolution, didn't make the playoffs in MLS, so it'd be what, October 19th. So it's been a few weeks, but not that far outside of being sharp. I know he's training with Crystal Palace right now. We know the beef with Ollie Glasner and Palace, but are you surprised that he's not in? Did Pochettino talk about it at all?
He didn't. He wasn't asked about the goalkeepers. I am surprised, not just because he's not here, but he brought 4 goalkeepers. So you bring 4 in, and Matt Turner's not here. That's, I think, not a great sign for Matt Turner. And I still believe that when you go to a World Cup, like, we can talk about all these other qualities. Like, if you need your best shot stopper, if you're the U.S. men's national team, like, you just need somebody you can trust to keep the ball out of the net. Like that is like the simple job. And I still think Matt Turner is at least one of the best 2 options for this U.S. team. So to see him left off is surprising. I'm sure the answer probably would have been, look, he's been out. He's not been playing. We have goalkeepers here who are playing every week, and we want informed goalkeepers as our choices. I think in reality, Matt Freese is the number 1. And maybe we're seeing some of the same things we saw with the Zach Steffen, Matt Turner discussion, where it's like, okay, if you're going with one guy as the number 1 and the other guy's been 1A, 1B the whole time, maybe it makes more sense not to have him here. I think the Zach Steffen decision was a little bit more complicated than that, but that certainly factored in. But yeah, I'd be concerned if I was Matt Turner for sure.
When I was listening to the press conference, he made mention, and maybe it's to your question at the end, about what kind of message are you kind of sending to the whole group. Even if you're not called in, it felt like he was still extending an olive branch. You still have a chance. Don't worry. You're on our radar. How much do you think of his roster is pretty much set? Even though we see some names on here that we're a bit surprised about, where do you think he is of the 26 that are there with only 2 windows left now before he has to name the team? How much of the 26 do you think he's got determined?
That's a good question. I think in his mind, he's probably got 14 or 15 guys that he really trusts.
I feel like he'd have more at this point. Man.
I don't know. I think knowing him now and seeing how things have gone, I think he is definitely, look, I think there are guys who are probably in the lead for those other spots where he's like, okay, Aiden Morris is right now a step ahead of this guy and this guy and this guy, Berhalter and Zawadzki and Musah. But does that mean it's going to be that way next June? I don't think so. Whereas I do think a player like Weston McKennie, despite all of the drama and the ins and the I think he's okay, this guy's going to help me at the World Cup. McKennie's a lock. Tim Weah is going to be in the team. Christian Pulisic is going to be in the team. Balogun's going to be we can go through the starting lineup and have a pretty darn good idea of what it's going to look like. But I really think this competition that he's fostered is real, and I think he wants those guys who are second even on the depth chart to feel like, oh crap, I don't have a guarantee to be on this team. So I would say there's probably, and I would also say that number is impacted by the fact that I don't think there's any goalkeeper beyond Matt Freese who should feel he's on the team.
100%.
So that impacts the number as well.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, if you don't make the March roster, you're pretty much dead in the water. and I'm looking at you, Yunus Musah. You got 4 months to get your shit together at Atalanta. Let's talk about Yunus Musah right now. A bit of a surprise omission that Zawadzki, I'll just use a name on the roster, is in over him. I could see the Berhalter stuff, played in the Gold Cup and all that, and played regularly. Zawadzki, I'm frankly surprised, and it makes me really concerned for Yunus Musah's future with the national team, at least over the next calendar year.
Yeah, I mean, this is a direct. I think we have to acknowledge that this is a direct result of a decision Yunus Musah made to skip the Gold Cup, right? Like,
Yeah.
he skips out on the Gold Cup. He needed to be away for his family. He's not really been 100% clear on what exactly it was. He said he needed to take time away. It was for his mental health. He had a great summer. He went to London. He was with his family. All of those things. Well, he missed out on being a part of that Gold Cup team, and then he hasn't been playing at the club level. And that's pushed him further and further down the depth chart. So, yeah, I mean, I think Yunus Musah right now, like, he is a guy who, if the World Cup was tomorrow, I don't think is on this team. And the only way to change that is to get on the field at Atalanta, to play regularly and to play well. And, you know, I think it's a fair challenge to lay out there to Yunus Musah as well.
Right. So when I hear you explain, missed the Gold Cup, doesn't really play much for his club team. Sounds like Gio Reyna. Sounds like Gio Reyna.
Yeah.
So now, listen, Yunus Musah made the choice to not be a part of the Gold Cup. And in whatever his reasons are, he clearly needed it. And I have nothing but respect for the choices that he made. But now there are repercussions to those choices. And with regard to Gio, I don't know if he got the opportunity to want to come in. And actually he couldn't, because he was part of the Club World Cup. So he didn't come into that, and now he's not playing regularly. So it just feels like I'm doing the 6-7 thing for all you kids out there that watch the show. But it's like I don't want to say it's a contradiction, because I know it's not like for like, but it does feel like there's some special circumstances that are being created just for Gio Reyna in this moment.
I mean, of course. And I think he said, look, like, this is a player, we know his talent, Gio Reyna. And I think that is where the question is, Jimmy. Like, do you still believe in the talent of Gio Reyna, or do you think that window has passed? And, like, I think it's, how do I want to say this? I think it is fair to question whether the Gio Reyna of today is the Gio Reyna when he was 17 years old. He has not played consistently for several years. This isn't just a one-year thing. He hasn't been on the field consistently, essentially, since his age 17 season. And, you know, everyone kind of holds on to the hope of, well, when he came back in after the World Cup and he was in the Nations League squad, he was the best player on the field, or he created the most opportunities. And so that is the sign that Gio Reyna can still be a player that doesn't exist elsewhere in the pool, that does something different than anyone else. And that's where I think the comparison with Musah divides, right? It's like, well, there are other players who can do what Musah does. There's no one else that can do what Gio does when he's playing his best soccer. But it's been a long time since we've seen the best. Even if we took that Nations League, it's been 2 years.
Right.
So that's where it's like, and then it's like, okay, I think the other little bit of calculus here is, if he's not a starter for you, do you believe he can be a good teammate? Because even in this AP interview he said, like, I did that because I wasn't happy with that I wasn't playing. And, like, okay, is that going to be the same in this World Cup? Because are you going to come back in and be a starter, or are you going to be cool being behind Christian Pulisic and Tillman for those two number 10 spots? Like, that's the other calculus that has to go into this.
Yeah. Wow. I can't wait for this camp. This is going to be a good one. Paul, thank you so much for your time. Paul Tenorio from The Athletic. Thank you, everybody, for hanging out with us. As always, here on the Glosso America YouTube channel, we're obviously going to make this one short because of the roster announcement in particular. We dropped that video a little bit earlier. If listening to this on podcast, it's all going to be in one place, and you're going to enjoy it immensely, like always. Have a great weekend. Thanks for hanging out with us, best community on the internet. And we'll see you next Tuesday live on the Gloss America YouTube channel, 10 a.m. Eastern. And we'll continue to break down what's happening with the U.S. men's national team. See ya later. Thanks, Paul.
See ya.